The double take of seeing the cast of Galgun enter a gritty action Metroidvania has probably been emphasized enough, but following the announcement of Grim Guardian's Demon Purge, seeing love interests Shinobu and Maya as protagonists doesn't get old. That said, I was skeptical about how these characters could exist within this genre. Despite developer Inti Creates being at the helm, who is known for Blaster Master and Gunvolt, I approached with caution. Thankfully, Grim Guardian's Demon Purge is an interesting clash of worlds that manages to work even when taking a few limited systems into account. As previously stated, Grim Guardians features Shinobu and Maya from Galgun Double Piece as playable protagonists. On their way to school, the building transforms into an ominous castle that the sisters must traverse to hopefully get it back to its original state and rescue the students trapped within, including the Galgun Double Piece protagonist, Hyundai Kodoki. The premise is simple, and even when considering later developments in the plot that amplify the stakes and tension, it remembers its roots and never takes itself overly seriously. Aside from the gameplay, the real draw here is the character interactions. Whenever entering a new area, finding and defeating a boss, and encountering later unexpected contexts, Shinobu and Maya frequently converse. For those unaware of who these characters are, this title does an excellent job of emphasizing and showcasing the genuineness of their relationship. Further, the rescued schoolgirls are all expectedly defined by tropes, yet still manage to be endearing, adding further dynamic variety to the several scenes. Granted, nothing throughout the narrative comes off as profound, but it does its job of establishing circumstances. Throughout the castle, players explore various themed areas. After a boss is beaten, you'll rescue a significant character, obtain new sub-weapons for Shinobu and Maya, and progress to a new part of the castle. That's the general cycle for a while, but its predictability doesn't hamper its effectiveness. Regarding its Metroidvania presentation, the castle's areas are still quite linear, and despite the multiple pathways, you'll often just head in a singular direction, with a few brief dead ends housing bonuses and girls to save. This makes it fall more in line with the older Castlevania titles. Admittedly, the sisters do gradually obtain sub-weapons that double as navigational tools, and the second half of the experience changes the structure somewhat, though the usage of these features is minimal and never long-lasting. Moreover, the game's second half does pad itself with retraversing areas, but never overbearingly so. Basically, you'll never have to think too hard about progression since the game not so subtly steers you in a specific direction. Unfortunately, many of the enemies you'll encounter are forgettable both design and moveset wise. They do their job of getting in the way, yet they're overly fragile even on veteran mode, and only have one or two attacks at most. In fact, I often thought I was playing on lower difficulties since the vast majority of these enemies fell within a few hits. In a sense, this comes off as a way to quicken the pacing of exploration, and at a certain extent, I suppose it does. It's just that, save for a few exceptions, they largely felt like minimal distractions and don't require much skill. Thankfully, the bosses are all excellent. Every one of these encounters boasts magnificent, varied appearances with movesets that are enjoyable to learn. Additionally, they're never overwhelming and should take the average player a few attempts at most to understand. However, there is a certain design choice I've neglected to mention that makes facing them odd, to say the least. So let's sidebar for a second. One of the central gimmicks of Grim Guardians is the ability to switch between Shinobu and Maya at will. Both characters have pros and cons. Shinobu uses a machine gun, making her ideal for range context, while Maya gets up close and personal with the blade. Further, Maya's smaller structure allows her to move while crouching, enabling access to otherwise inaccessible areas. Plus, the previously mentioned different sub-weapons both sisters obtain clearly illustrate distinction across the toolkits. Honestly, the slight pause and emitted voice line when doing the character switch does become a little tiring, though that's pretty minor. With that said, if you ever perish as the player-controlled sister, the game will send you back to your last checkpoint as the other sister without the one you died as. This is where the continue system comes into play because players have the opportunity to reach the collapsed body of the fallen sister and resuscitate them via brief button mashing, putting them back in the fray. On the off chance you die as both sisters without enacting resurrection, you will lose a continue, spawning you back to the previous checkpoint with both sisters. This mechanic does craft an undeniable semblance of gameplay tension since even falling into a pit results in a death. initiating the process I just described. It causes players to be highly cognizant of their movement, especially during platforming sections, where one mistake can ruin them. I should also note that continues are unlimited if playing on easier modes. I find this concept interesting, but my reception was mixed on its usage in boss battles. Dying as one sister will cause the other to spawn by themselves right before the boss room. Then, you can revive the other sister while attempting the fight again, yet the boss retains a fraction of health depending on how much damage you dealt beforehand. While this can be seen as helpful, I find it mitigates the challenge, since if you're practically close to defeating a boss but died while a few health points were remaining, you'd just retry with a significant amount of the boss's health depleted already. It takes away from the strife of each attempt, ultimately making it all too easy, and personally, just being sent out after only one sister dies just felt needless in the scenarios, as it came off as an overly kind gesture. Adding to the lacking difficulty is the resource that Maya and Shinobu's special attack dropping way too often. Thankfully, the replayability presented after beating the game can grant players more of a challenge. I just wish that was available from the start though. Further, the option to play as 2 players provides varied ways to take on these encounters, but it may require a sense of teamwork. Sadly, the story scenes aren't voice acted, with only battle quotes and other one-liners receiving the treatment. Regardless, the English dub is great, and the actresses embody their characters well. On the other hand, you'll hear Shinobu and Maya's battle lines a little too often. Alternatively, Japanese audio is selectable for those who prefer it, and while I didn't stick with it, it does appear that the whole main story has Japanese voice audio. The soundtrack here didn't quite do it for me, as aside from proving a fitting ambience, they're mostly forgettable tracks. The standard enemy design fits the same mold too, though a few of the later areas and bosses are beautifully stand out. The pixel animation is gorgeous as well, but we could expect that from the developer already. One final point I should discuss is how prior to the release, I was confused as how this connected to Galgun based on the demo. It just felt a bit disconnected from the overly sexualized series, yet these fears were unfounded in the later hours. I won't detail how, but this definitely has the Galgun elements at its heart. Grim Guardian's Demon Purge is an enjoyable Metroidvania containing all the necessary ingredients for an action-packed adventure. Its smooth movements and animations, variety of combative approaches, and well-designed bosses, alongside its captivating character design and interaction, make this a journey many will find delight in, regardless of their Galgun familiarity. The faults I've mentioned, such as the oddly implemented revival mechanic and the overt ease of the first playthrough, can hinder the experience, but at least in my case, never significantly so. I never thought I'd say this, but I wouldn't mind another Galgun-esque entry in this vein. There are multiple types of arousal after all, and variety, as they say, is the spice of life. Noisy Pixel is giving Grim Guardian's Demon Purge a 7.5 out of 10. Thanks for watching. Please read the full review at noisypixel.net. Noisy Pixel is run by a group of gamers who work hard to deliver news, reviews, previews, and more. Please subscribe to keep up with all our future content.
Noisy Pixel.